any more damage is done in Ukraine and also to Russia. I thank you, Mr. President.
أشكر ممثلة المملكة المتحدة على بيانها وأعطي الكلمة لممثلة غانا.
Thank you, Mr. President. My delegation would also like to convey our sincere condolences to the family and the Irish mission on the sad passing away of Ambassador Jim Kelly. Mr. President, my delegation is grateful to the High Representative for Disarmament Affairs, Ms. Izumi Nakamitsu, for her briefing to the Council. We have taken note of the information provided to the Council. Once again, we reaffirm our belief that a conclusive determination of Ukraine's biological program can only be made after due assessment by the relevant internationally accredited bodies. As we previously stated, the weaponization of chemical or biological agents in the war in Ukraine or anywhere else would be unconscionable and should not be contemplated by any party. The international community must forge consensus towards the establishment of a verification regime for the Biological Weapons Convention in view of the recent global developments, including the COVID-19 pandemic. We maintain that the possession or proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, including chemical and biological weapons, neither assures international peace nor national security. We must work collectively to ensure the elimination of all such weapons. What is pressing, Mr. President, is the need for the cessation of hostilities and the unconditional and immediate withdrawal of the Russian Federation of all its invading troops from the internationally recognized borders of Ukraine. Increasingly, this conflict is having ramifications beyond the borders of Ukraine. The consequent price hikes in food and gas are impacting in a negative way the already fragile global economy, which is yet to recover from the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. By this unjustified war, the lives of many across the world have been put in peril. We therefore welcome the Secretary General's intention to mobilize global action to mitigate the impact of the war and support all efforts to enhance international solidarity. We bemoan the rapidly deteriorating humanitarian situation and call on the warring parties to respect and comply with their commitments and obligations under international law, international humanitarian law, and human rights laws. Civilians must be protected from harm. Civilian infrastructure must not be the target of military bombardments. Safe passage must be provided for the people who are fleeing to safety. We call for an immediate end to the attacks on medical and other critical facilities and also call for the protection of humanitarian and medical personnel. Mr. President, we encourage the sustenance of the ongoing talks between the negotiators of the two sides and hope that they will yield an early breakthrough for the peaceful settlement of this conflict. I thank you for your kind attention.
أشكر ممثلة غانا على بيانها وأعطي الكلمة لممثل البرازيل.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Let me begin, as others, in conveying to our friends at the Mission of Ireland our very, very deep condolences for the premature loss of Ambassador Jim Kelly. I would kindly ask the delegation to convey to Ambassador Geraldine, to all the mission, and to the family of Jim Kelly our deep, deep condolences. Let me also take this opportunity to thank High Representative Nakamitsu for her briefing. And before beginning, Mr. President, let me kindly request other members of the Council to kindly refrain from attempting to interpret Brazil's position on any issue. Brazil is perfectly capable of presenting its own views in this and in other bodies of the United Nations. Mr. President, 50 years ago, we adopted the Biological Weapons Convention, determined for the sake of humanity to exclude completely the possibility of biological agents and toxins being used as weapons. We took that important step, and I quote the convention, convinced that such use would be repugnant to the conscience of humankind and that no effort should be spared to minimize this risk, end quote. Today, for the second time in a week, we gather here to once again discuss extremely serious allegations regarding the development, production, and stockpiling of such abhorrent weapons. As we stated last Friday, Brazil believes that accusations of such gravity must be thoroughly substantiated by solid evidence, which must be presented to and confirmed by an independent and impartial authority, as foreseen in Article 6 of the Biological Weapons Convention. Brazil has long favored the negotiation of a multilateral verification protocol as a complement to the Convention, with additional measures to guarantee protection and security against emerging biological threats. The situation before the Council today only reinforces the urgency and the necessity to establish such a mechanism. Mr. President, Brazil looks forward to the convening of the Biological Weapon Convention's 9th Review Conference. We need to restart negotiations on strengthening the regime, including by establishing a verification protocol. This will also be an opportunity to deepen discussions on biosafety and biosecurity. Brazil is of the view that legitimate scientific and technological research should be kept distinct and separate from possible violations of the prohibition against the development and production of biological weapons if we wish to preserve the Biological Weapons Convention regime. Research into new and dangerous pathogens should be subject to strict transparency mechanisms. Finally, I would like to reiterate what we said last week. Brazil condemns in the strongest possible terms the use or threat of use of all weapons of mass destruction, including biological and chemical weapons, anywhere, by anyone, under any circumstances. I thank you, Mr. President.
أشكر ممثل البرازيل على بيانه وأعطي الكلمة لممثلة كينيا.
Thank you, Mr. President. We join others in expressing our deepest condolences to the mission of Ireland and the family of Ambassador Jim Kelly over his shocking demise. I thank Ms. Izumi Nakamitsu, Undersecretary General and High Representative of Disarmament Affairs, for her briefing. Mr. President, it is regrettable that the armed conflict in Ukraine rages on at an intolerable cost to the people of Ukraine, and increasingly to the entire world, especially the global south, as prices of essential commodities rise sharply because of shortages and the impacts of sanctions. We are gravely concerned by the sustained targeting of civilians and objects indispensable to the survival of the civilian population, including residential homes, health facilities, shelters, as well as power and water infrastructure, in violation of international law and international humanitarian law. At this point, Mr. President, this Council should be focused on getting a cessation of the military campaign in Ukraine. We appeal to the concerned to do so immediately to allow humanitarian action and facilitate a much-needed dialogue towards a sustainable political solution. Any allegation of the development of biological weapons in contravention of the Convention on the Prohibition of the Development, Production, and Stockpiling of Biological Weapons must not be taken lightly. We call on all state parties to the Convention to make use of the established mechanisms so that any concern or suspicion of the presence of these extremely dangerous weapons can be verified. In situations of armed conflict, we must point out that such verifications demand a cessation of the conflict for it to be carried out. We urge state parties to the Convention on the Prohibition of the Development, Production, and Stockpiling of Biological Weapons to seize the opportunity of the 9th Review Conference later this year to strengthen the biological weapons regime. In closing, Mr. President, Kenya reaffirms its recognition of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. I thank you.
أشكر ممثلة كينيا على بيانها وأعطي الكلمة لممثلة النرويج.
Thank you, President. Let me also express our deepest condolences to the Irish mission for the very sad passing of our dear colleague, Jim Kelly. At the outset, thanks to the High Representative Nakamitsu for your briefing. We were called here today at the request of the Russian delegation to again discuss claims of a biological weapons program in Ukraine. Yet, we heard from the High Representative last week, and it was repeated today, and I quote, "The United Nations is not aware of any biological weapon programs in Ukraine." Russia has failed to offer any credible evidence for its claims, providing us instead with unsubstantiated information, allegation, and interpretations. We have trouble understanding the rationale behind the last-minute call to have further discussions today. We find it unacceptable that Russia continues to repeat its unsupported claims that Ukraine is preparing to use biological weapons. It is becoming quite clear that this is just another smokescreen tactic to draw attention away from Russia's role as aggressor in this illegal invasion of Ukraine. President, Norway remains a firm supporter of the Biological Weapons Convention, and we are determined, together with partners in the international community, to uphold a total ban against biological weapons. Norway condemns any use of such weapons. They cannot and must not be used under any circumstances. This would constitute a clear violation of international law. We deeply regret that Russia, by calling these meetings, seeks to undermine this council and its vital role to peace diplomacy. Exactly 8 years ago, we were shocked by the Russian illegal annexation of Crimea. And now, Russia is waging an unlawful war against another UN member state with devastating humanitarian consequences. The sole responsibility for the war falls on Russia. Russia must end it now. Thank you.